For nearly 150 years, the people of Thornhill Lees had a curfew of their own, the 10 o'clock gun. It sounded every night from Wormolds and Walkers mill, and I talk about it here not just for the viewers, but also for all those whose memory of this tradition may not be as good as it once was, and also for our children and our grandchildren. Sadly, the mill where once the 10 o'clock gun was fired is no longer with us, although the building itself still is, for it closed in 1983. However, its memory still lives in the minds of many thousands who once worked there, many of them for most of their lives. The firing of the 10 o'clock gun is a tradition which belongs to Dewsbury alone, starting as it did in 1815 to alert mill owners living on the top of the hill that the mill was safe from a Luddite attack. Although the gun is no longer fired, the memory of it has been treasured and talked about by Dewsbury people for generations. It's a tradition which belongs to Dewsbury alone. It is our heritage. When the gun was heard at 10 p.m. every night, Saturday and Sunday included, people would set their clocks by it.
When it was his turn to be on night watch, he used to fire the 10 o'clock gun. They fired it exactly on 10 o'clock every single night, and Mr. Wormold, who at that time lived up in Breezefield, used to listen for it. And if he heard the gun, he then knew that the night watchman had been round, locked everywhere, checked all the doors, made sure everything was okay, and he could then settle for his evening without worrying. And if you were out walking and you saw anyone walking towards you, they might say, do you know what time it is? Has the gun gone? Have you had 10 o'clock gone? And people used to listen for it and used to set the clocks by it.
It was also a signal for every young girl out courting to immediately head home, because no decent girl in those days would be out at that time of night. The following detail is a true account of Dewsbury's 10 o'clock gun, as related by Stanley Oldroyd. The 10 o'clock gun was a tradition which started in 1815, shortly after the Luddite riots in Cleckheaton, which resulted in mills being attacked by disgruntled mill workers who feared new machinery would affect their livelihoods. It was fired at this time every night to let the mill owners living some distance away know that they could go to the bed knowing that all was well at the mill. If the gun didn't go off, they would immediately rush there to investigate what was going on, as would those living nearby. The gun was a muzzle-loading bell-mouthed blunderbuss, which was kept hanging behind the door in the watch house, and the gunpowder was kept in a drawer nearby. The firing of the gun became a local tradition, which was kept up for 150 years, even though the telephone had been invented many years earlier, rendering the firing of the gun no longer necessary. Even throughout the war, the 10 o'clock gun continued despite fierce objections from the Ministry of Defence, who wanted it stopping because the local defence force might misinterpret it. The mill owners, however, made forceful representations on the ground that it was well-known, well-loved tradition, and surprisingly, the MOD relented. Sadly, the gun was stolen some years before Wormolds and Walkers closed down in 1983, and it was never recovered. Stanley Oldroyd remembers a gun hanging on two hooks on the wall of the watch house, and half an hour before it was due to be fired, the watchman would take it down to get it ready. He would cut a pile of paper into small sections and place them down the muzzle, and then take a scoopful of gunpowder from the drawer and put it down the muzzle, ramming them down. When this was completed, he would take the gun outside, walk into the middle of Thornhill Road, where he held it up above his head, pointing it towards the sky, and fired it. But as the night watchman got older, it became more difficult for him to hold up the gun in the air, so eventually the firm stopped using it. The tradition, however, was still to go on, and instead they used special fireworks, which they got from the Standard Firework Company, to make the sound of the gun being fired. When the mill closed in 1983, the sound of the 10 o'clock gun, or exploding fireworks, was finally silenced, as were the looms of Wormolds and Walkers Limited, a mill which in its heyday employed 1,400 people. The mill building eventually came into the ownership of Calder Textiles, which thankfully retained much of its history, including an old film taken inside the mill in the 1930s, showing the production of yarns and blankets in the mill. They put this into a sequence and enlisted the help of former employees to add to it, And this is now in the safekeeping of the Yorkshire Film Archives for posterity and public reference. Various night watchmen would have carried on this tradition over the years. The man in our picture was named Watson, but there were others. How fortunate we are to have this photograph telling us the story of a famous 10 o'clock gun.